Welcome to another video, and today I'm going to be looking at, this is the first of several videos by the way, where I'm looking at the reason that I use several exercises to effectively strengthen an injured joint. Let's get into it. So rehabilitating injuries is harder, there's no doubt about that. One of the problems that I have with people who email me or ask me questions is their expectation that there's just one or two things that they need to do and then everything will be fine again. It's hard for them to get their heads around at times that the exercises that they really need they just can't do in the beginning. They're just too difficult. The ones they used before that, they're helpful, but they're never really going to finish the job. So you have to have a gradual sort of progression of building up to the ones that you really need to do. You can't avoid using them, otherwise you risk re-injury. You end up in this constant loop of hurting yourself all the time. So this is where I thought I need to make a video that explains this, because I release videos all the time with exercises, but they're not really, a problem I have is they're not in context. They don't explain how, like when you would use them, because they can be really good but not good at certain stages. So I thought I'll try to have that explainer video, and then I'll release a few videos to give you examples of what I mean. Alright, so firstly, so I get a lot of questions, which I've just said. With all the technology and all the access to information, there's so much information there that often makes people confused, and they make many mistakes, not because what they were doing was wrong, it was like when they were using it that was wrong. The longer that you've had injuries, the longer it's going to take to get out of it, and the more things you're probably going to need. If your injury is relatively recent, you will probably only need a handful of things, because you wouldn't have lost too much strength or developed too much compensation that creates that makes the process more difficult. So, but most of the people that I get questions from, or people looking up YouTube and that from Google for a reason, is because they've had it for ages and they haven't been able to rectify it early on. So, so this will help you to explain that you really need to set yourself for the process of it being sort of longer than you expected. So another reason why it's hard is because there's no template. So I might have a video saying I really like this, and I do and it does this and this, and it really works well, but that's not for every person. There's no way it could, because everybody's so unique. Age, females and males are different. Occupation you do is different from one to the next. The sports you play, maybe you don't play sports, maybe you play a musical instrument. The foods you eat, how well you sleep, how you react to stress, all these things can have an influence over how effective a program will be. Some people will learn things quickly, other people will be really uncoordinated and it's just not their thing. They just don't move well, so they're going to find it a lot slower and more difficult to get it right. Alright, so that's why you can't follow a template. You have to have a series of tests and that, which I've done videos on that before, to guide you on what to do. Alright, so the one thing that's consistent with everyone, whether you're a professional athlete or you're a person that's never done anything ever before, is you have to learn to move better. Alright, there's no two ways about that. The better you move, the easier it is to gain stability and control over joints and muscles and develop strength from them. If you move poorly, you just can't do that very well. You're always going to be compensating and cheating somewhere, and it compromises the way that things are meant to do. So good quote here, remember that muscles do what they're told. If they're not doing something if they're doing something you don't like, tell them to do it differently. Communicate the muscle through repetition of good posture and movement. Alright, so that's the one thing that's consistent with everyone. The way you do that is obviously a lot different, but ideally that is the end goal, is to try and to do that. Alright, so when it's a pain, and I've done videos on this before, where if you can look up ones, I'll put the links below, where I've talked about chronic pain, information on cortisone injections. I discussed this quite a lot as well, but basically the constant cycle of pain is basically, you have a lack of synovial fluid that's cushioning joints. This is a knee example. So there's an increase in pain, and then because of the increase in pain you have a reduced mobility and movement. Probably the fourth part in this would be a reduction in strength, compensation of movement, and then basically you just repeat that cycle and it just gets worse and worse the longer it remains. So to break that cycle is really important, and the only way to do that is via exercise. All right, so the first thing to learn how to do that is learn how to move effectively, like I said before, the one thing that's consistent, and learn how to effectively stabilize and strengthen the joints that are creating pain, and especially damage to the connective tissue, the tendons and the ligaments. They're the things that attach the muscles to the bone. They're the ones that usually end up either really weak or torn, like a supraspinatus tear for a rotator cuff in the shoulder, so shoulder impingements, ACL tears, knees, small muscles around the hip, discs in the lower back. It's always those areas that get repeatedly damaged. So the muscles are not communicating the movement very well. So to effectively change and stabilize these joints, you're going to need several exercises. It's not going to be just one thing. Success formula. So this is a rough guide of how I would try to approach that. You wouldn't obviously go straight away to strengthening. You would try to identify mobility restrictions and release trigger points, knowing that that's not the end game, because some people stop there because this sort of reduces the pain sensation, but it hasn't really effectively changed anything. Stability is probably the critical stage, and one that people just skip. They go straight from mobility to strength, but I always find this one is the one that basically prepares the body to move better, so I can effectively strengthen, especially with the functional movements. So once I've got stability, then I can really improve my strength and functional integrated multi-joint positioning. And then if the last stage, especially for sports, is the power stage, but for some people that's not necessary. I might only need really the first three, and only some small element of this, but it is definitely a part to consider. All right, so within each stage, they sort of need more exercises. So as you can see, this inverted pyramid here. So the mobility stage, I don't really need that many. I can really progress through that quite quickly. But the stability stage, it's a little bit more difficult, and obviously the strength stage. And I'll put here 6 to 8 exercises. That's for each phase, and you'll see in a minute there's actually several phases of strength. So this probably builds out to probably 30 exercises, to be honest, but these ones will always sort of be fairly small. All right, so the reason that that you will need so many is some have a high emphasis on mobility and others of stability, is that it's very hard to do things in the initial stage of the strength things, and often they're the trigger of the pain. So for example, here with a herniated disc or even a hip related problem, this bending action is usually very difficult. There's something going on around the hips that are causing the spine to flex on itself, so either you rupture a disc or you're developing severe weakness through the hip because you can't effectively use the glutes. So when you stand, this is where you would see SI joint piriformis syndrome, hip impingements, even leading to knee pain. This poor hip action is really compromised, and you can't effectively do this with load. All right, and you need to do it with load. You can't just do it body weight, because it won't effectively strengthen the weakened area being the glutes here. All right, so I need a several build-up of exercises to get to this to effectively strengthen it. All right, so I can't just rush to it. The mobility won't change the strength. I might be able to get the position, but I can't control the load. All right, so that's why I need to have this gradual transition up the pyramid. So this would be like we're going up the stairs, following from the initial injury, identifying the pain, addressing mobility, improving stability, starting to integrate, then to strengthen, and at that stage I should be well on the way to pain-free. But to get to that stage is going to take a significant amount of exercises and a lot of frustration of back and forth trial and error. All right, so with the mobility restrictions, they're more easily identified, and like I said earlier, you only need a handful of exercises. The hardest part really is finding the right one, because there's several ways to mobilize areas. sometimes they're too aggressive and they cause more pain because you may be weakening something that's too weak. All right, so you might need to find something that's more suitable for you from where you are at that particular point in time. And even when you find it, you're going to need some considerable time to improve it. Also bearing in mind that some areas will remain tight while the weakness remains, in which you have yet to address. All right, so they're things to keep in mind with the mobility side, but they're usually easier to address in the beginning. Even if you can't improve them, you already know where they are, and now you just need a bit of time and address the weakness with the other exercises to come. Stability weaknesses are harder to detect, because and even harder to improve. So so for example, here with the wall slides drill with the shoulders, scapular problems, most people have no idea how that works, how they cannot feel it or understand it, they can't even see it. So to try and work through this stage can be quite tricky, but the best part is there's little risk with getting these wrong, because there's no load, and they're usually fairly regressed, so it's easier to work through the mistakes and learn how to gain control over the joints before they're heavily compromised. Bearing in mind, remember, the purpose of this phase is just to prepare the joint for the strengthening stage. So you're gaining control over it with good positionings, good understanding of posture, a good flow of the movement. So the wall slides is a good one. This one is arguably a strength exercise, but I put a single leg stability, so I might use other exercises to do that are more floor based in the beginning. But basically this quote here is a really good one, so people use their stabilities to keep them stable instead of their global strength muscles. Make a huge difference when it comes to the injury prevention side of things. All right, so examples of stability exercises, and some of them are actually good tests. So this one's not an exercise, but it's a test that I may use for a shoulder impingement. So it tells me if I'm doing like my wall slides correctly or controlling my scapular function. As you can see here, poor scapular stability, and we'll see a loss of control at the shoulder. So before I start to strengthen it, I can already identify where the problem is and use a simple exercise that's not heavily loaded to gain control. So when I want to start strengthening it, I can use this test to tell me, oh, it's time to move on, I can do that now, and there's going to be less risk involved. I might need some of the mobility things to assist me in that stage. For the hip and back things, this is where it might be simple hip extension tests, basic kettlebell deadlift where I'm not even picking up, I'm just learning how to get that hip position before I'm loading it, and using tools to help that person understand that. For knee pain and hip pain, the single leg stance again, probably identify if I'm losing control of the knee valgus and collapse, and abdominal testing obviously is another factor again, which probably leads into the back pain more than the other ones. But these are all good exercises where I could make mistakes in this phase and it's not going to be a disaster to me. And it's telling me that it would be if I went to the strength stage. So I can learn to gain control, so then I can progress to the strength stage. Now this stage obviously needs the most exercises for several reasons. The first one is I need to hit the muscles from multiple angles. I can't just use a hip thrust to strengthen my glutes. It's a good exercise for the glutes, but it doesn't work the glutes. It works in the same way that I would use in a deadlift, and the same way I might use in a lunge or a squat or when I walk. The way that the muscles and the joints interact with each other are completely different. So if I only learn how to strengthen in this stage, it does not guarantee that I'm going to use it in this stage, where it's going to be a hell of a lot more problematic. And same thing again, if I just do the deadlift, doesn't mean I'm going to get control of the glute in a lunge and other various squat as well. So I need to have a way of gradually progressing from the least risk movement to the obviously the highest risk, which is usually the trigger of the pain. If I cannot use one thing, and I can't do them all at once because it'd be way too much, I have to have a gradual learn this one, learn this one, learn this one. All right. But the main thing to understand is the strength of one muscle doesn't guarantee the movement or pain, and just hitting it from one angle doesn't improve its strength, and especially the integrity of the tendon again. All right, so the functional movements are the most effective in the long term at correcting things, but they're also the most problematic. So having these gradual phases with trying to sort of like, this is where it gets messy because it depends on the injury on what I might use. That's again why it's hard to use templates. I'm just giving you a rough sort of general explanation of this, but understand the main thing is just understand that I'd use a gradual movement skills, fine tuning, and then starting to really strengthen things as they adapt and get better. Another part of the puzzle here is the isometric and eccentric streak that I might have to use for certain injuries, especially knee ones. Really important for getting strength in the tendon. So, which I've covered this again in the previous videos, but this is really useful for injury because I can really start to load it, but with more control and very slow tempo, isometric, I'm not even moving, so it's like the decline squat. Really strengthens the tendon more than the muscles, but basically recruits more motor units to increase the force production through the tendon. Prevents reduction in bone density with the mineral content of the bones as well, and this is perfect for people in the early stages because the movement's so heavily controlled. In the eccentric loading, I've got like a 30% increase in strength on the eccentric phase than the concentric phase. So I can really work through loads, but with the severe reduction in the risk that comes with it, and more importantly, I strengthen the tendons more effectively with this method than any other method. I won't go too much into detail because it'd take too long, but you can read the more about this in the article in the link below, so check the description. So once I go from simple movements to slow tempos with the isometric and eccentric, then to finish the job I need to move to the more integrated movements. So as you can see here, so a single leg to the loaded tendons with the isometric, and then to faster loaded stuff in a different stance. Once again, I'm going to need a series of programs and exercises to do this. I can't just do them all at once, but it's these interacted movement, multi-joint, fast tempo things that usually or always will like finish the job completely and prevent re-injury. Or if you only finish in the early stages, you may be pain-free, but the risk of re-injury will still be high because they don't know how to interact with other movements and other joints and other muscles. All right, so this progressive build-up of programs is completely necessary. All right, so in summary, rehabilitating is obviously difficult. There's no templates. You've got to take your time to do it correctly. You've got to follow the process. You can't skip stages. Each phase is going to need more exercises to give the body time to adapt and grow and for you to learn how to do it. The strength phase is by far the most important, but also the most time-consuming and the most problematic. Multiple exercises to use to do this effectively. That's for the connective tissue as much as the nervous system. So that's coordination and as well as the muscular system. But if you do that right, you should not have a chance of re-injury, and even if you do, you don't have to go right back to the beginning. You just have to retrace your steps back to the point where you can gain control over things again. So it's always a bit quicker if you've followed that process. All right, so there's heaps of these in all of the programs for knee pain, back pain, shoulder pain, all these things, hip pain, all the advanced programs they have. If you haven't seen these before, I do have like 6 month sort of programs that break this up. This kind of explains everything I've just done now. So on the YouTube, I'm going to do some quick overview ones. It's impossible for me to say what's exactly right for you, but just to give you an idea of what I spoke about here, I'll do some quick overview ones to give you ideas of some of these exercises in real time and how one follows on from the next. But if you do have trouble with everything, these provide the assessments to tell you which exercise is right for you, because that's the only thing I can't do, because there's no way I could without seeing you if things are right for you or not. And with these programs, that's what really they're all about, is saying, okay, I've got a whole heap of variables, so these are what do I need, where do I start, what do I do? And this takes you through all of that and guides you on the path to being pain-free. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that video, and we'll see you again soon.